And we are live, folks. Today we are joined by Natalie Brunell of Coin Stories and the Hard Money Show. We're going to be talking to her about a bunch of stuff. Just a quick reminder for everybody watching this video, though, if you see anything down in the comments below and it says something like hit me up on WhatsApp or something like that, it's not me, it's not Natalie. I guarantee you she doesn't do that either. And there's a lot of scams out there, so please be careful. And with that, hey, Natalie, welcome to the Survival Podcast and the Bitcoin Breakout.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to this. I
am glad we got you on through Twitter DMs, no less. That doesn't always work, but it did this time. So I really love the work that you're doing. I want to start out, though, talking a little bit about your background. I know you are the daughter of Polish immigrants, or at least on one side of the family. I don't know the whole genealogy. I come from a background of being a Ukrainian immigrant family. Wow. And I think there's kind of some similarities there. So how do you go from kind of that background to ending up with a career in journalism?
Yeah, sure. I'm super proud of my immigration story. My parents and I were born in Poland, and we came to the US when I was 5 years old. So I really don't remember my life back in Poland. Like, I look at pictures of myself, and we traveled a lot for my parents' work because they would import merchandise and sell it in Poland. We would basically go purchase it in different countries and then sell it in Poland. So that was kind of an interesting thing, but I don't remember those trips and those memories very, very well. But we came to the US when I was really young, and my parents basically started over and they had to learn a new language. My mom was in her late 30s. My dad was in his early 40s. And I just watched them work really, really, really hard. They, my dad would get up at like 3 o'clock in the morning and be de-icing his car. And my mom would work as well, but she would always come home and make like a Polish dinner for us. And they were just such loving parents that instilled me with a really strong work ethic and this sense that like education was going to propel me in life. So I had to be a good student and just like be a good person. My family's religious. And so it was a good upbringing in the sense that I felt loved. I felt rich in love and support and encouragement to do whatever I want, but very poor in financial security. My parents it was really rough for a while. We didn't have enough. Like, the apartment that we lived in was so small that my parents slept on like a pull-out sofa, and I just watched them struggle. And so for me, I was always like, I really want to pursue a career and become successful so that I can help my family and so that I don't face the kind of struggles for when I have a family someday. And I always wanted to become like a person in media, journalism, or I even thought acting at one point because I watched a ton of news and movies growing up. They were always on at my house for two reasons. Number one, my parents would be working or busy. So it would be, entertainment. But number two, it would help my parents augment their English skills and help them learn how to speak English. So we had all, the news programs on that I would watch, and I would want to become like Barbara Walters or Oprah Winfrey. And then we also watched a lot of movies. So I always knew I wanted to work in this like four-angled lens environment. So I pursued journalism in college, and my parents were super supportive, but I know they wish that I had studied biology and gone pre-med, but I disappointed them with journalism.
That's the thing too. A lot of times parents want kids to do a certain thing. And I always tell my listeners, like, you get one chance to choose the path for a person and it's yours. And if you didn't do it, like, your kids, they get to choose their path. And that's what we should be looking for as parents, is to guide our kids up in that way. And you can want one thing, but I think we end up proud of our kids when they work hard and achieve. And you did, right? So like you actually achieved, like, for journalism, broadcasting and what have you. Like, you really achieved a lot. You ended up doing really well in mainstream media.
Well, thank you.
That had to be a point where, like, your parents had to be like, wow, this is great. You had to be like, this is great. And then you did this, crazy thing, and you said, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to be independent. And the path of independent journalism, I know, is a tough one. You are all in, all for yourself, and nobody cares, at least initially. What made you decide, I'm not going to do the MSM thing anymore? I'm going to go do the Natalie thing? Because that takes guts, especially when, like, you're walking from something that is successful. That's totally different than, I got a journalism degree and nobody hired me, so now I'm independent. That's a different thing.
Yeah, no, that's such a great question. And I think, the immigrant background, I think it makes you a risk taker. And so even when I discovered Bitcoin in 2017, I really didn't understand it, but I like put some money in it because I feel like I'm emboldened by this idea that if you don't try, then you'll never know. If you don't ask, then the answer's no. And that's how I was always kind of brought up. And that's honestly what my journalism career taught me as well, because you have to be so resilient and intrepid as a reporter. You know, you have to knock on doors and you have to ask people on the worst day of their lives to talk to you with a camera, no less, right? That's not easy to do. You have to find ways to ask questions and make people feel comfortable and just take chances, take risks, so that you can try to get the information you need for your storytelling and your reporting. But ultimately, you know, my industry changed a lot as I went into it and over the 10 years that I did it. When I was in college, you know, like I mentioned, when I was little, we would watch appointment television, and everybody really watched television. There was no Facebook, YouTube, you know, news feeds online, Twitter. You literally would turn on the news at 5 or 5:30. People knew who their local news anchors were, and you watched all the same national personalities. And it was a much more predictable, stable, and lucrative path to be kind of a journalist, right? And I was very determined because my parents instilled me with this idea that, like, you know, even if 1 in a million can get to that level of being national, being, you know, Barbara Walters, well, like someone has to be that 1 in a million, right? And like you just have to work hard. Like you have to be the first person in, the last person out, be kind to other people, you know, just work hard and you can achieve your dreams. So I always was instilled with that. But I go off to college and boom, the internet is just like taking over and transforming the economy of television, where, you know, advertising deals that they're now competing with the internet and things like citizen journalism and YouTube's coming out. And so all of a sudden the business model kind of flipped on its head. And what was once the job of one person, where you would have, like, I would be a reporter and that's it, and someone else would do my lights and my camera and this and editing. Now you're doing all of those jobs, but you're being paid 1/5 of what, you know, someone was making before. So, you know, the business really changed, and I did not have a fortune ball to tell me that when I went into the industry. So it was challenging because I entered in as the industry was almost like collapsing on itself. And I felt like mainstream media, I felt like there used to be a lot of independence in local markets, but now they're starting to be gobbled up by the big corporations, and we're all of a sudden becoming more and more polarized. Now there's a right and a left, and so I, you know, that was the backdrop against which I got my journalism experience and cut my teeth in these different markets. And I think also the last thing I'll say about that is, in 2008, 2009, my parents lost everything in the financial crisis. And again, that was just as I was entering into the industry. So I had this seed sort of planted. I had a predisposition when I entered the industry of there's something wrong with the system, because my parents just worked really, really hard. They're good people. They pay their taxes. You know, they both worked jobs. They were able to afford a mortgage, and now they just lost their home. But the big companies and the big banks got bailed out. Like, how did this happen? How did our global financial system almost come to the brink of collapse? And I never learned in school what quantitative easing is, what the money printer does, how it works, what the history of the financial system is. But again, I had this like seed in my brain, like something's rigged or off with the system. So I did my experience as a journalist, 10 years. And 2017, I discovered Bitcoin. Didn't go down the rabbit hole until 2019, when someone gave me the Bitcoin standard. And then it was like, oh my gosh, this is why all the problems I've been reporting on exist. This is why people feel left behind and everything's getting more expensive, and we have increasing poverty, and we have corrupt politicians who pledge money and they never lose their jobs, but all the problems just balloon and balloon and balloon. And I was like, oh my God, it's because I didn't understand how money works. I didn't even understand how our money system function. And so then I became passionate and I devoured everything I could. And I decided to start a podcast just as a passion project, a hobby on the side. And then it started to gain traction. And I was able to come to a point where I said, you know what, I could probably make more of an impact by going off on my own and spreading knowledge and education about Bitcoin and our current financial system than I could to remain as a reporter, which you're right. At the time, I had a good position. I liked my station. I liked my boss and my network, but it still didn't fit quite right, because I wanted to share these other things about the world and why these problems were happening, and not just like who, what, where, when, how, why. These are the, this is the problem. Well, like, I know what's causing the problem. The problem's the money. So I wanted to focus on that. And I know that's a long-winded answer, but that's basically how I came to it.
It's a great answer. And I just, there's a lot of people doing this now. And I think the whole like work for 1/5 the wage and do 7 times the work is part of it. But I think a lot of it is freedom. I don't think you would have the freedom to talk about the issues you really want to talk about if you worked for CNN or MSNBC or somebody like that.
Yeah, I mean, basically, as a reporter, especially when you start to have real opinions on why things are happening, it's hard to be in an environment where you can't share some of those thoughts, right? And you can't connect those dots. And I always loved storytelling. I always loved television and cinematography, but I felt like I really want to, share knowledge about why some of these issues that I'm reporting on are happening. And so many of them to me are rooted in our financial system. So if I would be reporting, here in LA, I was an investigative journalist. I would do stories on like homelessness or public corruption or, elections or this or that. And I couldn't really get into the nitty gritty of why why these problems were getting worse and worse and worse every year when we were just pouring money on them, because the government solution is always, well, spend, right? I'm the one that's going to spend more. I'll fix the problem. That guy's to blame. And it's so much more nuanced than that. And I really wanted to focus on that like side of helping educate people like, hey, no. This is what money printing is. This is what the Cantillon effect is when it comes to the money printer. This is, the relationship between banks and money and the state. And that's what got my wheels going at a certain point. And Bitcoin was that thing that, could usher in hope, because one thing I want to mention, and maybe some of your audience has felt this way too, before I learned about Bitcoin, I started to get kind of negative about the future, and you could probably imagine I'm always reporting on negative things. As a journalist, it's always doom and gloom, and what bleeds leads. That's the proverbial thing. And I would think like, gosh, like, my friends don't want to have children. Everybody thinks it's too expensive to have a house. People are spending more than 50% of their paycheck on rent. Like, what does the future look like? I can't even imagine a happy, peaceful future at this point. And then I learned about Bitcoin, and it was truly, I mean, this is going to sound maybe, altruistic or whatever, but like I saw it as a beacon of hope that through technology and through this new network that nobody owns, no one can manipulate, we can kind of lay the foundation for a new economy and a new system of value that can hopefully reorder us into a more cooperative, prosperous society at large. Because I do feel like if you're a good person and you want to work hard and you want to add value and you want to take on risk and drive, progress, there should be equal access to opportunity. We won't all be equal. It won't be a perfectly even society, but like we should have opportunity. The opportunity should exist.
Yeah, you've caused me now to jump ahead in my questions because I want to hit on this thing with hope and this altruistic thing. Leading up to this, I listened to a few of your shows, Pieces and Parts, and I've always been a fan of Dave Portnoy from Barstool Sports, and his success as an entrepreneur is where I've been there. But during the interview with him, he kind of crapped on the whole altruism, like Bitcoiners are in it to make the world better and all. He said, I just think they're in it for money, and there's a little bit of mirror, I think, action going on there. And there's nothing wrong with being in a business for money. I'm an anarcho-capitalist, to be completely upfront, but they're also like, you can be in a thing for money and you can be in a thing for the right reasons at the same time. Like, I think the best way to incentivize society is do something that is profitable and actually beneficial at the same time.
Yeah.
And to me, I don't think Bitcoin fixes everything, but I think it fixes a lot of things. Or one of the problems we end up with this like a utopia fallacy. If the thing you're proposing doesn't 100% to solve the problem, which by the way, we've had this problem since the dawn of civilization, and none of the crap you guys have done has fixed the problem.
Right.
But if your solution doesn't make it perfect, your solution's flawed. And I feel like, and I know you didn't push back real hard, and I don't do that with my guests either. I'm not a big debater. I want to hear the other side of the story. It's kind of what I love about your interview style. But from your perspective now, with free and open to say this, do you feel that a lot of people in Bitcoin really are here. Maybe in the beginning its number go up, but over time as they do the research, because he's not orange pilled in my view, right? He hasn't done
I
that
agree.
deep dive. Do you think a lot of people come in and it is number go up, and that's why they go into shit coins like Doge or whatever? But when they go and do the research, don't you think they do begin to see this larger view?
Yeah, I mean, I tried to give him some points, right, about different aspects of Bitcoin and why I truly believe in it. But, I do disagree with him. And I think that when I hear people just make assumptions that, oh, people are just in it for the money or it's just this, it does indicate to me, someone who has spent countless hours researching Bitcoin and the technology network and the programming, all of it, it just indicates to me that they just haven't gone down the depths of the rabbit hole. And so they see it more as like a stock or an investment that at some point they'll exit potentially and take profits. And I think when you do learn about Bitcoin in this grander picture of, changing our system from one of credit and endless debt, this debt spiral that we've been building on that requires so much money printing to just sustain and balloon, like creates this wealth concentration and this disparity in society that gets worse and worse over time and sparks populism from the bottom. I think when you look at it from that backdrop, you start to see that Bitcoin can actually create a system based on something that is disinflationary or deflationary, and we can again build a new economy where your money actually goes up in value and hopefully things become cheaper, over time. We can live in that world, and I think so many of us just don't envision it because we've never seen anything outside of that paradigm. But I think it takes that sort of like rigor and education and knowledge about how the financial system works to understand and have foresight of where it's going if we maintain the fiat debt standard versus the imagination of what we can rebuild on the other side that could potentially be much better. And I do think, like what you mentioned about incentives, Bitcoin kind of flips greed on its head and takes greed, which naturally we, I guess, have as human beings. We're naturally greedy, as people say, and it flips it on its head to make it be something for good that benefits everybody. Like if Bitcoin, wins and we all are in Bitcoin, it should hopefully benefit everybody and encourage people to provide value based on something real, based on supply and demand, based on real interest rates, based on just real elements of our society that have been skewed by crony capitalism. I think we have crony capitalism where the state has increasingly too much power. The state takes advantage of its prerogative over money and its power over money and to issue money and make money, create money, and the connections that it has with these too big to fail corporations and banks. And all of it is to the loss, to the disadvantage of the majority of people in society who don't own assets, who aren't landlords, who don't own a bunch of equities, and people feel pushed down and left behind. I mean, this is what sparks populist revolutions and people feeling frustrated and civil unrest, and people are looking for places to blame. So now I see my whole experience, as a journalist totally differently because I covered the civil unrest and the polarization so much in my time as a reporter. And now I'm like, well, of course you're fighting each other because social media brings out this side to us where we feel like we have a wall, but in front of us we're protected, so we can say things we wouldn't normally say across a dinner table to someone. And we just are trying to find someone to blame for this feeling that we have that the system has wronged us, that it's unfair, that someone at the top has so much and I'm trying so hard to get by and I have so little. Like, why is this so unfair? People feel like it's unfair. And I think most people don't have aspirations to have 50 yachts and become the next Jeff Bezos or flying to Mars. Most people just want to take care of their family, put food on the table, afford their college education and a house and a nice vacation. Like, most of our needs are pretty simple. People mind their own business 9 to 5, and they just don't want to get screwed over by the system. And so,
yeah.
I
mean, I completely agree. The way I describe it is Bitcoin brings back 7th generational thinking.
Yeah.
And that's why it's hope, because it starts to make you think about your future. And if you look at all the problems we have in the world today, it arrives from scarcity thinking. Like, if you want the solution to conflict, what you're looking for is abundance rather than scarcity. Yeah. And when we look at scarcity, there's natural scarcity that's in Earth. There's only so much can be done about it. Like, there is conflict in the northwestern United States, like Colorado, Wyoming, over water because water is scarce. There's no conflict over water in Florida.
Yeah.
Right? It just doesn't exist, right? So there's certain scarcities we can only do so much about. Now, there's a lot of environmental solutions to the water shortage. This is a Bitcoin show. We're not going to get into that one today, but If you go back in time, there was a time in history where men spilled the blood of other men in wars over the control of salt.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's pretty horrific if you think about it. Now, there's no
Mm-hmm.
conflict over salt today because we figured out how to make salt abundant. So abundance is the cure to most of the conflict in the world. And if it's not the cure, it's at least the mitigator. And I've heard it said in Bitcoin, and I think this is absolutely true. I don't remember who I heard it from first, so I can't give proper attribution, but you can have scarce money or scarce everything else.
Yes.
If the money's scarce,
Jeff Booth talks a lot about this.
That might have been Jeff Booth, might even have been on your show. That to me is really where we're hitting at, because if you create scarce money, then you have a situation where you can have an actual meritocracy. It doesn't mean there won't be winners and losers,
Completely.
but losing maybe hurts less and winning maybe doesn't look so much like spiking a football.
Yeah, exactly. No, I completely agree with you. That's exactly what we need. Right now, we have abundance in money and scarcity everywhere else. And what we need is scarcity in money so that we can have hopefully abundance everywhere else. And I am a believer, now that I've done so much research into economic theory and macroeconomics and the history of money, that capitalism is actually the way to bring about the most prosperity for everyone and the most access to opportunity. Will there still be wealth inequality? Yes. And there will still be inequality in general because, a lot is determined by sort of your birth lottery and then what skills and education that you gain and what you bring to the table, what you put out there. Some people just want to sit on the beach and they don't want to work. Some people want to put in 70 hours. Some people want to take on massive risk and create, we're all different, right? But there shouldn't be a system that is so unfair that only the people at the top that have access or who are close to the money printer, the monetary spigot, get access to easy money, cheap loans. They're able to buy back, their own stock, pay themselves crazy bonuses, get a bunch of real estate because of easy loans or easy money, and then make everyone into renters in the country. I mean, the system is just, right now it's about rent seeking and who you know and how politically connected you are. That's not fair. That's not capitalism. That's not capitalism at all.
No.
And so I hope that Bitcoin kind of ushers in, again, this idea of personal responsibility, and there are no companies that are too big to fail and backstopped by taxpayers so everyone could just socialize their losses and privatize their gains. That's not what America was actually built on. And we've sort of bastardized the foundation of what this country stood for and what it could have become because we exceedingly just pushed money further into the hands of government, and now they're the most powerful people in the country, I would argue, and in the world, right? These central bankers, the people in the White House, and really, it's sad to see that there are no consequences when there is failure of policy. When things go wrong, they maintain their jobs. That's crazy. That's so silly to me. And so there needs to be a shift, but there won't be a shift until we really wake people up to how the system actually works. And Bitcoin is beautiful in the sense that, I talk about all this stuff and the Bitcoin's the solution, but I'm focusing so much on the problem because until you understand the problem truly, you don't really appreciate the solution, which I think is Bitcoin.
I agree. And I think that what the angle now is, of course, Bitcoin is destroying the environment. And this is energy fed by people who have no idea where Bitcoin miners and how they source their energy because they don't want to waste money. They want to get the cheapest power they can. So they're buying surplus power. They're using gas flare energy that would happen anyway. But it seems like the whole control apparatus is built around everything is pollution and we need a cleaner environment. I had Guy Swan on Tuesday, and what he said is if you want to find people that don't care about pollution and just pollute everything, find me poor people. Right? The poorer people are, the less time they have to be concerned. I have to feed my child tonight. I can't care about the fact that this is a toxic thing. The idea that we actually preserve the environment comes from a place of stability. Where if I don't have to worry about feeding my family this week, this month, this year, I have time to worry about how can we do this in a more environmentally friendly way. But it seems like the solution is make people as poor as possible because then they'll use less resources, which is really, it's completely counterproductive to the stated goal. And I don't know if the people that are making that claim are incompetent or immoral or both, but it doesn't seem like the right path at all to me.
Yeah, I definitely think it's more incompetence and lack of education. I truly think that it should be a requirement for people who run for public office to understand economics, and not just the Keynesian economics, but truly have a fundamental understanding of interest rates, supply and demand, and how economies function and how money works. I really I wish that was a requirement. But no, I think that, going back to incentive systems being broken, and the government's now subsidizing and energy industries that they deem appropriate or right, and this whole ESG model and all of that, when there are counter arguments and counterpoints, and there's so much misunderstanding about energy and how it's used and how those ecosystems function when it comes from an economic standpoint. We have so much, I think, misinformation about nuclear. We have so much misinformation about mining and like how much electricity it uses compared to anything else in the world, and legacy systems. And so again, like, we need to shed light on some of those things, because energy use is not bad. We need energy in order to function and progress society. We need to use energy, and we have an abundance of energy, but some of it we've chosen not to tap into. We choose instead to buy it from other countries when we could literally produce it right here. I mean, some of these things are just so silly, and it's like, who is making these decisions? I truly want to believe, and I think this is because of my background, like, I am a person of faith. I don't believe that people individually, except for maybe a few, have malicious intent, and that they're just like inherently evil and they want to go into office to just like hurt everybody. I don't want to believe that. I'm sure that there are some people that are genuinely corrupt, but I hope it's few and far between. I genuinely think it's incompetence and lack of education and lack of understanding of the big picture and connecting the dots, and just getting lost in the kind of like chaos of information from staffers and everybody who's also lacking education, and the media that portrays it one way. And I don't know how to fix that on a large level. I like choose to focus on, helping everyone I can sort of understand, and leading like a small movement and helping people understand, educating them on the financial system. But on a grand scheme, I mean, there's a lot of work to be done, especially with our policymakers.
Yeah, I think a lot of it could be attributed to Bonhoeffer's theory of stupidity. Bonhoeffer being a writer and a minister from the time that we had the Holocaust go on in Germany. And he said that there is no more dangerous of people than people who have been made stupid. And he didn't mean intellectually slow. You could be very intelligent, but you could have been made stupid by the system. So when you say you don't attribute to malice any more than you have to, I grew up Catholic, went through Catholic school for at least part of my childhood. And one of the things that when I look at the modern education system, and I go back to the 1980s when I was in school, is that even in Catholic school, we had a comparative religion course. Mm-hmm. Right. So we learned about the Protestant Reformation in Catholic school and how it actually had an impact on the Catholic faith, and perhaps made it better in some ways and solved some problems, because now you had to do something to admit your own problems. Mm-hmm. But we also learned about like the Hindu faith, the Buddhist faith, et cetera, mm-hmm. not so that we would become one of these people, but so that we would be aware. And when I look at modern education, specifically at the university level now, you mentioned Keynesian economics. Well, you only teach Keynesian economics. Right. And maybe you give a byline for 2 seconds to Austrian economics. This crazy crackpot theory or something like that. So you end up with an entire group of people who are convinced they're smart. I have a master's degree in finance, right? Yeah. I have to be smart. My piece of paper says so. So the very definition of really being stupid is to believe you know a thing and a thing is wrong, but have no ability to even see the crack.
Yeah, no humility. I completely agree.
You mentioned Keynesian stuff too. So like, this is like an interesting thing I picked up this week too. You really have to judge even Keynesian economics with when that was developed by Keynes. We had a gold standard. And gold was the governor of government, so it was also the governor of economic systems. So as flawed as it may be, it was probably a lot better with a finite centralized resource. And I didn't know this at all, but apparently Keynes actually postulated the concept of stateless money at some point as well. So like we judge everything today based on today in our educational system, our political system, our media from the past. And we don't say, well, what was the ground like at the time? And I think that's contributed to a society that is so tribal that, I offend everybody. Both sides are stupid. It doesn't mean intellectually slow, but they're stupid in their behavior. And they're dangerous because you can't rationalize what's stupid. Like a person has to be willing to have their ignorance cured to get past the ignorance that they're dealing with. And when you're operating on ignorance, but you believe you're correct, you're dangerous. And that's why I think we have I'm not going to say all our problems, but many of our problems or the problems we have are made worse because of this.
I would really agree with you. It's interesting to study kind of Keen's background. And I know some of the Bitcoin authors in the space have tackled this, but just that idea of, kicking the can down the road, which I think we see right now in our fiat system of debt and inflationary policy, where it's like, oh, well, Keen's saying is like, in the end, we're all dead, right? And there's these animal spirits or something that create some of the bubbles we experience. But no, there are actually reasons why we have booms and busts. And I think that people need to be a little bit more critical and analytical of our education system, because at the end of the day, if it's the Department of Education and if it's the government that is signing off on curriculum, well, of course they're going to probably sign off on curriculum that makes the government look really good and extends the amount of power that they could possibly have in every aspect of society, right? Like that power they want to maintain as much as possible. And so we do have an education system which may be considered rigorous and better than other countries in the world, but like it's meant to reinforce what the government is basically saying. And I think we don't have enough critical analysis. It's one of the reasons why I'm actually really happy that we have the internet and YouTube and all of these places where it's a democratization of information on a global stage, where you can actually start to question some of the things that you've been taught and ask the right questions and maybe dig in for more information, because history, you will start to find, isn't as factual maybe as you were under the impression of when you were younger. It's actually very subjective based on who wrote that history and who's telling you that history. And so we need to be a little bit more analytical. And unfortunately, most people don't have like a great background in terms of getting an education, and especially economics or history. And we need to do a better job as a country for that. I'm a huge, obviously, proponent of better education, more financial literacy. And it's sad to me to see, like, this was actually, I think, a statistic that was portrayed in an HBO show called Newsroom, which I used to watch because it was about my industry, with Jeff Dan. I forgot the name of the guy, but he gave this like massive speech at the beginning of how like America's not the greatest country in the world anymore. And he listed off reasons, right? And he was like, we're 46 in education and we're this and this and this.
Yeah.
Well, like we need to be honest about some of those things. So we can say, oh, we're the superpower, we're the greatest. Well, actually, we're not that great when it comes to some of the aspects that are fundamental to progress and societal, functioning, including education. So I really think we need more work there for sure, because people have a skewed idea of what economics is, I think.
Gotcha. So let's talk a little bit about you left mainstream journalism, you started doing your own thing, and two of the things you developed since then. You have a podcast called Coin Stories, which everybody in my audience should subscribe to. It's awesome. And you also have a new show called Hard Money. Can you kind of tell us the genesis of those two things and what they're all about?
Yeah. So Coin Stories came first, and that's my podcast. And I'm super grateful that it has grown to make me be able to do it as a career. It's amazing to me. But basically that came again from my journey down the rabbit hole. I was so fascinated not only by just all the information that I was learning about the financial system, but I was fascinated about the people who were having these discussions, from podcasts to the books that I read to Twitter. I discovered Bitcoin Twitter. And I questioned myself, like, who are these people? Like, where did they come from? What were their jobs? What were their backgrounds like? Did they come from financial security or insecurity? Are they immigrants? Did they come from wealthy families? How did they discover Bitcoin? Why did they believe in Bitcoin? Like, why is this important to them? And those are the questions that I think were in my head, because I'm someone who I've always loved people. I love studying people. That's why I think I was naturally inclined to journalism. I like to know why people are the way that they are. And I've always loved biographies and autobiographies, especially if you watched a journey or listened to a journey of someone overcoming obstacles or rags to riches, just something inspiring. I've always loved those stories. So I thought, well, I'm going to just, like, for fun, for a hobby, maybe people will be interested, I'm going to try to interview some of the biggest names in Bitcoin and just see, like, where do they come from? What are their origin stories? How did they discover Bitcoin, and why do they have conviction in it? And maybe some reaction to, headlines surrounding Bitcoin. So I started reaching out. People started saying yes. And that podcast grew very, very organically. So I've had really the biggest names in the space, from Michael Saylor to Lynn Alden to Jeff Booth to Preston Pysh to, all these big names that you might follow. It's their whole backstory, their whole life story, who they were and before Bitcoin and after Bitcoin. And so that's my podcast. And then recently we launched a show called Hard Money, which is produced by Swan Bitcoin and Bitcoin Magazine. And it is a once a week news show. Since that's my background, it's a video news show that gives you Bitcoin headlines, but also ties it in with global economic news. So the Federal Reserve actions that they take, interest rates, inflation. We kind of bridge that divide because I feel like in media at large, no one's doing that. No one's talking about economics and finance, but also Bitcoin and like intersecting those two worlds. So that's the show. We have interviews every week. We have original stories. I'm super grateful to be a part of it. So you can catch our newest episode actually on Thursdays. So tonight, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern on the Swan Signal YouTube page.
Awesome. So who was your favorite guest so far that you interviewed on Corn Stories? Because it literally, you have a playlist called Great Minds of Bitcoin on your YouTube channel. And it really is, right? So who was your favorite? I know it's like picking your favorite kid, but.
Yeah, I can't give you one. I'm going to give you a couple.
Okay.
I'm going to say Jeff Booth. He is just so brilliant and thoughtful and makes me think about so much he makes me think a lot about the future and the kind of world we can build with Bitcoin and the kind of system we can rework from one of, again, debt and credit and just this cycle of money printing to one of value and just Bitcoin allowing for us to potentially actually be more equal in society and have more access to opportunity. So I would say Jeff, and he has an awesome backstory. Michael Saylor is always fascinating. I learned so much from him, and I know a lot of people they tune in because they really want to hear Michael Saylor. He's just he's brilliant. I can ask him a very simple question and he'll go on these brilliant tangents, and I learn, I study how he talks about Bitcoin because I think he's really constructive and thoughtful and intentional about how he sees this really becoming a very competitive advantage for the United States if they make proper legislative decisions on it. And he's so active in trying to help make those legislative decisions happen. And he's also really committed to giving back. He wants to help educate the world. And he wants to provide free education. And so I just think I think he has like a good heart behind him. And then Lynn Alden, I would say, I mean, again, I learned so much about macro from her, and she has this fascinating backstory where most people don't know. She was homeless as a child. She had to overcome a lot of financial insecurity and obstacles. And now I would say that she's one of the most brilliant minds in the space and in macro and finance at large and investment at large. And so her story was cool too. So I just named 3.
Okay, that's fair. But then you also had the big bad on Peter Schiff.
Yeah.
And I hadn't listened to that one yet because I didn't know something. And somebody put a clip of yours up on Fountain today. Somebody I follow on Fountain. .fm put it up, and I listened to it because it was like a 2-minute clip. And It turns out you did something nobody else has done in this space yet. You got Peter Schiff to admit he wished he had bought Bitcoin, which I guess is not an endorsement of Bitcoin. It's just obviously I could have made billions of dollars with a small investment of my net worth. I mean, I made a video, like a viral video long time ago, and it was like the Bitcoiners tearing apart this warthog. It was lions on the series. They tearing this white warthog apart. And it was like the IMF and the World Bank and all, and they're all eating it. And then the last lion that finally comes walking in out of the scrub at the end, I had Peter Schiff on. And it kind of feel like that's kind of where he is. But how did you get freaking Peter Schiff to admit he wished he had bought Bitcoin? Because that we should, like, if there was a podcast award, like if we did something like the Emmys or something, you should get an award just for that.
That's one of my favorite clips. I just published it the other day again because of what he's been commenting about the bank stuff in Puerto Rico and what happened to him and confiscation of funds and freezing of accounts. And I'm like, Bitcoin fixes this. And he said to me, he wished he bought. But yeah, I have a clip that says, clearly, I wish I would have bought Bitcoin. I don't even remember the question I asked him, but it's just funny because I actually really like Peter Schiff.
You said if you went back in time, what would you tell your younger self?
Yes, that's what I asked.
And he just
I was like, what would you tell yourself? And literally the question was open-ended. He could have said anything. He could have been like, well, I wish I would have whatever. And he goes, clearly, I wish I would have bought Bitcoin. Super great answer and moment in my show. But it's funny. I have to say this. Peter Schiff is brilliant when it comes to economics and monetary history. And on my coffee table at my house, I have a couple of books that are just my favorite books that I've read about Bitcoin. And on that actually pile is his book called The Real Crash, which has nothing to do with Bitcoin. But I recommend it to people because Peter Schiff was, he was Dr. Doom or Gloom or whatever. And he was the guy that was interviewing people in the Occupy Wall Street videos. He really has been calling out the problems of our easy money system and big government and crony capitalism for a long time. And he predicted that we were going to have a crash, and he predicted the unwinding of everything that happened in the financial crisis, which, he discusses really thoughtfully in the book, because he says that that should have been our crash. We should have allowed things to fail. It would have been painful in the short term, but we would have been better off in the long term for all these reasons. And he goes through the history of our financial system. And also he breaks down every aspect of government that he would change to a more small government, hard money focused, way or formula. And it's really brilliant. It's fascinating. And it touches on so many of the principles that are popular with Bitcoiners, or that Bitcoiners really believe in. But it has nothing to do with Bitcoin, because he's a gold bug and he believes in gold. But I really recommend that book because it teaches you that we didn't really have, we thought that the financial crisis was bad, but the real crash that's coming when, we can no longer keep playing the music and, the music stops and everyone has to find their chair. It's going to be far worse than what we would have experienced in 2008, 2009 had we really let things fail and crash, because now the bubble is so much bigger. We have a tech, and an equities bubble. We also have a real estate bubble. We have an everything bubble. And we can't keep kicking the can down the road forever. We think we can, but it's leading to all this wealth disparity and frustration and wealth concentration. And it's leading to civil unrest. And it's leading to, I just think, a breakdown of the fabric of our society, and the fabric that once made this vibrant, beautiful middle class and the representation of the American dream that people wanted to come here for, including my family. And so, he predicts that we're going to have an even bigger crash. And I believe that that's where we're headed. And thank God that we have Bitcoin as this sort of peaceful parallel system that we can exit into at any point and start accumulating and start saving in Bitcoin as an insurance policy against this system, which is based on debt, which is based on crony capitalism, and it's not fair and it's unjust. And we have a solution, and his solution is gold. But Bitcoiners always point out the issues with gold. So I hope that Peter someday comes on board, and it'll be great. He said that if Bitcoin's being used as a medium of exchange and it becomes a unit of account, that he will admit he's wrong. He told me that in my show. Okay. So I'm waiting for that day.
Yeah, we'll see if he does it right. Because sometimes I think he's just a master troll, and him and his son are playing a good cop, bad cop, and the greatest scam on planet Earth, honestly.
Meanwhile, he's secretly stacking all this Bitcoin.
If you go to his website, he sells gold for Bitcoin. So of course, he would probably tell you he just converts it to cash immediately, because most people.
Online you can buy.
Yes, you can buy gold for. Now maybe he stopped doing it, but I know at least at one time, Peter Schiff, you could buy gold from his concern for Bitcoin.
I'm going to investigate this.
Okay, investigate. You're an investigative reporter. Go forth and investigate.
Yeah, no, but I really do like him. He's super smart. I wish he was into Bitcoin, because we agree on all the same problems. Yeah. We just disagree on the solutions.
I see him a lot like I see a lot of vegans, right? So vegans are great at identifying the problem. I too object to taking thousands of cows and having to stand in their own excrement up their elbows at a CAFO. I think that's a horrible solution. I too want a cleaner environment. I also think that if you plow a field down to nothing to grow soybeans, you destroy all life in that field. Mm-hmm. So the solution is putting a cow that's supposed to eat grass where grass grows and making more grass grow, and putting in lots of trees so the cows have shade so they don't die in the heat. So
that is revolutionary. I don't know what
it's crazy talk. It's not like it ever happened before with buffaloes running around or anything, right? So Schiff identifies this problem perfectly. Mm-hmm. And at the time, let's just give credit to a guy that's been in the business in the world a long time. He's an older gentleman, and he's dedicated his life to this study. At the time that he discovers this problem for himself, what is a solution? Well, gold is a solution. And gold is, at the time, there isn't another solution. It's what you have. Mm-hmm. But then you spend your whole life building a case for this thing, and this new thing comes. And it's very hard at that point to let go of the old thing. I mean, I look at it, I've seen people get mad at me when they talk about the boiling frog thing. And I'm like, that's not true, right? If you put a frog in water and start turning the heat up, the frog tries to get out. And they get angry just because they've said it so many times. Like now they have to defend it. I think there's some of that there, because when it comes to identifying the issue with the current system, he's not wrong.
Pride can be so toxic. And I actually think that this is playing out so much in our current environment of just like global politics as the result of the pandemic. Like new science emerges that basically questions what they were so adamant about masks or this or that. And they can't get off of that podium to be like, maybe we were wrong. No politician has the guts and the courage, the honest courage to just say, maybe we were wrong. And what an amazing, like, could you imagine if we had more politicians that were just like, God, we tried this and I think we got it wrong. So let's try this because we really want to get it right. And we admit we were wrong. Like instead we have these people that are just glorified, political publicists go up there and spread propaganda and stuff goes wrong. And they're just like, no, we knew it was inflation. Of course, this is not true. It's not transitory. It's corporate greed. It's this, it's that. It's the greedy gas, owners, whatever. It's just, why can't we have more humility? I can admit when I do something wrong, right? And my background encourages that. You learn from your mistakes. We learn from our failures. Nobody's perfect. But man, find someone in government that's willing to admit their mistakes.
Even the ones that corrected didn't admit they were wrong. Like my governor, Abbott, and Florida Governor DeSantis get a lot of credit for being open when the rest of the country was closed. They still closed down their freaking states. And when they changed, they were just like, well, we've done this now. We have to transition. We can't do this anymore. But neither one of them came out and said, that stuff I did in the beginning? Yeah, the reason I'm changing is I was wrong. And I've not seen a lot of that. Let's talk about you again, though. Let's talk about the fact you entered Bitcoin, in my notes here, 2017, I think you said.
Yes.
Okay, class of 2017. You've had your ass kicked a few times. So, Bitcoin's down right now. If you kept buying through kind of that cycle that led to a bust in 2018, 2019, and real huge correction that happened back then, you could be holding Bitcoin that you've now been holding for 4 years. That's back where it started or close to it. How does that make you feel about Bitcoin long term? Because I think a lot of the people on the outside all think like, okay, we're all going to run away. And like, I've been in this game since 2013 in earnest. And I think I got bought my first Bitcoin in 2012. So I've also spent a lot of it because back then we were trying to onboard people. So we would do what you're supposed to do with it. And it was, a thing. So I wish I had kept all I had bought, but I've been through the beating so many times now. I'm kind of with Michael Saylor. It just goes up forever if you zoom out.
Yeah.
How do you feel? I mean, you've been through it at least one good one now and the most recent one.
Okay, so I'll share 2 points on that. Number one, I've been in since 2017, and I saw it run. I got in, I think, at the 4,000 or so, 4 to 5, 6,000, and then I saw it run up to 20. I'm really proud of myself that when it I never sold, held on. But here's the thing, I'm kicking myself because I didn't go down the rabbit hole. I did what so many people do, and I was like, oh, this is just the new digital trendy thing that Silicon Valley's doing. And it's like investing in Facebook or investing in whatever early. And it's like a stock, or it could crash, or it could be hacked, or it could blah, blah, blah. I just didn't get it. I didn't have the humility to go down the rabbit hole. And I had a mentor who was telling me, read this book, The Bitcoin Standard, read this book, The Bitcoin Standard. And I sat there and I was like, I don't want to read a book about computer science and I don't have time for this. I've got stuff to do. And I really regret it because had I taken the time then, I would have probably gained more conviction and I was always a really good saver. I think from my immigrant background, I was always a really, really good saver, but I saved in cash and I could have put in way more than I actually did because I didn't understand the thing. But my second point is, what's your time frame? What's your time horizon, right? Because Bitcoin may be down right now over the last year or couple months, down 38% in 1 month of the month of June. But look how much it's up over the last 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. You have to widen your time horizon, because if you truly do believe this is a very young monetary network, a very young technology network, and you see its potential as the best savings technology and pristine collateral, then you should want to be in it for the long term and, dollar cost average, all of that. I'll admit, I bought, chunks at 50, 60 that I'm just like, oh God, I could have had, twice as much if I just would have waited. But none of us have a fortune cookie that told us that this crash was going to happen. If you listen to my show and you listen to some of the interviews that I've done some shows with non-Bitcoiners that talk about how I believe, and they believe, that there's going to be a deflationary bust that happens because we are at the end of this long-term debt cycle. Things need to shake out. They printed way too much money, and there's a consequence for that on a global level. But I did think that Bitcoin would ascend to higher highs, or it would have more of a blow off top, or it would get to the 6-figure mark and then maybe find support around like the 50K range. I did not think that it was going to go back down to the levels we're seeing now. And I think one of the reasons it's been hurt is by this like crypto ecosystem at large, this contagion effect of things that are cross collateralized with Bitcoin, that, people have to sell their Bitcoin in order to pay off loans and debt and all of that. And it's just a mess in a system that doesn't have bailouts and will get cleansed. It's a healthy cleansing, but it's painful. It's painful, painful, painful. But this is how actually capitalism would function if we had it in the greater markets. So it's painful now, but I have this long-term view on it that I am not worried that it's going to continue to grow, gain adoption. Developing nations need it more than us right now to combat inflation and autocratic governments and oppression. And I'm super bullish on it long term. It's just right now, it's kind of like maybe, you need to like allocate a little bit more to cash or be a little bit more careful about how much you go in chunks, because it might go down lower. You might need cash for your expenses. So we're in a very volatile time right now because of these macro factors that I assess with some of my interviewees. But long term, like, I think that Bitcoin will be a global reserve currency.
I agree.
Asset. I do.
Here's where I come from on that. I've been doing my podcast since 2008.
Mm-hmm.
And all the way, I started it right before the big financial crisis back then. And I was this completely unknown person. I was actually in corporate America back then. I was a COO in a holding corporation.
Wow.
And my partner, this guy named Neil Franklin, had really high level financial advisors and said, this whole thing is going to go to hell and get your money out of the market. And at the same time, I had a client who was a financial advisor, and he wanted a website, and one of the companies within our fold was going to do the site, and our lead web developer could not figure out how to handle RSS feeds for podcasts, which is basically throw an extension in there and it does it. So I'm like, I'll figure this out. So I started doing my show in my car, and my first message in preparedness was protect your hard-earned dollars. And I was saying this is going on. And after it happened, you get some credibility and all. And then I was going into economic lessons with the audience, and this is way pre-Bitcoin for me anyway. And I kept saying that we were going to have a monetary rebasement of the dollar. And of course, you're a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist, and that's what you're talking about. There's a rebasement. What made me completely sold on Bitcoin was what I realized is we can have another rebasement on the dollar like we've had in the past, like 1933, like a lesser impact, but 1964 with the Silver Coinage Act, like 1971 with Nixon. These were all actual defaults on the dollar that rebased the dollar. So
right.
The plan of the state would be to do another thing like this, right? So you can either let them do it with their money again, or we can take this alternative, and the monetary rebasement can go to Bitcoin. And if you told some of that 10 years ago, they'd like, you are nuts. I think when you say it today, people like, even that don't believe it's going to happen, they're still like, well, it won't, but maybe it could, or they won't let it happen. And I think that, like, in the end, the markets, right? Like, you can tell people you can't do this. You can tell people in Russia in 1985, you can't buy Levi's. But if you went to Russia in 1985 with a pair of Levi's, you could get just about anything you wanted. You could, if you wanted a cab to pull over and you held up rubles in 1985, the cab drove right past you. But if you held up a pack of Marlboros, right, that car screeched over. So, like, markets are going to market. And if this choice is available, I think that people more and more are beginning to make it.
Yes. No, I completely agree. And I think that people need to just zoom out. I mean, this is a very young technology network that very few people understand. It's extraordinarily nuanced because it requires a real thoughtful understanding of our current system and what's wrong with it. And people could understand Bitcoin a little bit and not really understand why it's needed or what the greater mission is. And there are so many macro factors at play. I mean, I think that we are entering into a decade of deglobalization. I think that we have benefited so much over the long-term debt cycle we've been in, from being the petrodollar, from being the global reserve currency. But that era is ending, and countries are starting to see, hey, when you're just printing money, we don't want to hold your treasuries anymore. And we don't have that much faith in the US dollar like we did in the past. And I think that the inflationary events and the crises that are playing out around the world are going to cause some currencies to collapse, first into the dollar and then maybe someday into Bitcoin. And I think that we're just in a phase of such change. And one of the reasons why this current, cycle moment is so painful is we've never been at the end of a debt cycle, but Bitcoin has largely benefited from quantitative easing and from money printing. Like we would be lying if we said it didn't, right? It's from birth to current day, it has existed in QE. That's what our government has been doing over the last more than decade. So now that we are entering into a phase of QT and we've printed all this money, we don't know what's going to happen to Bitcoin. I think it could drop lower. It could also, at some point, I think it will decouple finally, but more people need to understand it for that to happen. We need more clear pathways when it comes to a regulatory front. We're getting there, I think. Sad that we couldn't get a spot ETF. That sucks. But, we do have legislative officials that are recognizing this as a digital commodity, a digital property. Some of them are educating themselves to make, appropriate decisions when it comes to Bitcoin mining. Lots of work needs to be done in that space. There needs to be fair accounting for more companies to come in. We need these institutional avenues because no matter what some Bitcoiners say about, we don't need I believe we do need the institutions for more retail and greater adoption. And, hopefully people can stack as much as they can, because once those companies come in, guess what? They have way bigger pockets and they can scoop up Bitcoin at higher prices at levels that people can't. And so that's, again, why I'm trying to get the word out, because even if you allocate, 0.1% to Bitcoin, something, you're going to be able to get it right now at prices that you won't when big institutions come in and are starting to gobble it up, because now there's these, institutional green lights for them and on ramps. So I'd rather, the people obviously get it first before the companies, but we'll see what happens.
Well, I mean, to kind of get the scarcity, people don't get scarcity in their head. So I did the math. MicroStrategy right now controls 1/106th of all Bitcoin that will ever exist. Mm-hmm. Okay, so how many corporations are there out there that are bigger than MicroStrategy? Mm-hmm. How many of them have to take a fractional position like that before? Because then there's only how much Bitcoin available on exchange that people will actually sell before you get into like a level of scarcity where people start talking about the price of Satoshis instead of the price of Bitcoin. And I think that's when that happens, that's when we're game on. I think on the spot ETF, when that happens, it's almost game over right there, just because of the amount of the wall of money that will unleash through 401ks, IRAs, et cetera, where it's simplistic. And then it's kind of the government's blessing. I personally think they're delaying it because they haven't filled their bags yet. Like that's the actual thing yet. Like, because they know, like once we pull the lid off this, it goes, because the correction right now, if it was historically the same as it's been since inception, would put us at a bottom somewhere in the 14K range. That's where we would come off of a 69K all-time high. So, maybe you can shake it out, because that's how they play every other game where they buy anything. I think now my case for the ETF though is a moral case, or as a legal case is totally different than what I get out of it as a Bitcoiner. We have ETFs for cadmium. Yeah. We have ETFs for timber. We have ETFs for corn. We have ETFs for silver. We have ETFs for gold. If you can think of a thing that is a commodity in the world, we have an ETF for it. Material and non-material commodities. We have ETFs for everything. To single out Bitcoin and say, oh, you can't have an ETF for this is inconsistent with U.S. investment law. Mm-hmm. That's my opinion. And then I'll take all the benefits that come with it, please. Yes. And it also answers this thing of like, how do I invest in my retirement? I have people all the time asking, we've had a few people here today, like, but if I do like a Bitcoin IRA, I'm giving up that not anonymity, full control, etc. There are some that you can hold your own keys in, but now supposedly maybe that's not legal. I don't know. But I look at it the way I've had a lot of people want to invest in silver and gold over the years. And I said, if you want silver and gold and you want physical metal, you don't want it in an IRA. You have completely anonymous money that you can do anything you want with. You put it in a safe in the floor of your house with fire protection, right? If you want to hold silver in an IRA, you buy SLV.
Yes.
And so that's kind of how I'd like to see Bitcoin have like that two different worlds where you want to use that retirement money that's in the state's gaming casino, then you use the state's, it's not the state's Bitcoin, but it's the state's vehicle. It's the state's holding mechanism, because you're in the state's world. It actually makes more sense that way, because I also think the tax advantages are not that big a deal unless you're a trader. And I'm not a trader. I'm a DC every day kind of guy, and I wish I would have done more of it over the years. Right. So now I do as much as I can.
Yeah, no, I agree. And you made several really interesting points. On the spot ETF, I will say I disagree with the decision as well. It would have led to price discovery and more institutional on-ramps and retail on-ramps. But I do think that it's also a bit nuanced, and I do want to take the time to research it a little bit more, because, a lot of the commodities you mentioned are sort of managed and regulated and operate mostly here in the US, and there's a lot more control. Whereas, a lot of these exchanges and a lot of the markets for Bitcoin are international, where there isn't as much oversight and ability to sort of audit what's happening. And so I know that comes into play as well. I will say that, people can criticize Gary Gensler, and I don't know his true motives and intentions. I don't know him, but I did take the time to watch his 15 or 20 hour MIT lecture about blockchain, Bitcoin, and digital currencies. And the guy knows his stuff. So I think that we're actually lucky to have someone who understands Bitcoin and seems to be a proponent of Bitcoin and publicly identifies and labels it as a digital commodity. And I think in the end, more, the right decisions will be made. Maybe we just need a little bit more time, but there is a really good attorney that was hired by GBTC to sort of fight the recent decisions. So I guess we'll see what happens.
Yeah. I would agree that there is some nuance to it. Now, as far as auditing the underlying commodity, there's nothing more auditable than a blockchain, but shifting, somebody just asked this, right? And it actually is next on my list. Maximalism versus toxic maximalism. So I would call myself a maximalist. Peter McCormack on Twitter today actually said, can anybody define what Bitcoin maximalism is clearly? And so I said the definition of maximalist is one who advocates for the immediate and direct action to secure the whole of a program or set of goals. So a Bitcoin maximalist is one who advocates for the immediate and direct action to secure the whole of the adoption and implementation of Bitcoin. And so by that definition, I am a Bitcoin maximalist. I also think we've gotten to a place with, I guess what's called toxic maximalism is it's okay to be a shitcoiner to a degree as long as you haven't previously been a maximalist. And then if you say anything or do anything or think in any way, it's almost like a religion, like you're an apostate. You've committed blasphemy against and I am not a fan of true toxic maximalism. But then the other side of it is I think a lot of people call any maximalist a toxic maximalist, because if I don't agree with you, then I'm toxic. What are your thoughts on that whole? Is it because I don't know that it's helpful that when somebody asks a sincere question like, well, what about the block size limitations or whatever? People start shouting at them. I don't think that helps spread Bitcoin.
Yeah, so I'm definitely of the mindset and belief that we should be, as Michael Saylor says, cheerful and constructive, and I try to be as much as possible. I view Bitcoin maximalism as someone who puts the majority of their net worth or asset allocation to Bitcoin as opposed to anything else. The toxic side, it's difficult because at the end of the day, I'm a believer in free markets. But at the same time, I also don't believe that people should be scammed and that, we should have a system in which people sort of lead the sheep to the slaughterhouse, if you will. So I've always been very wary about cryptocurrencies. And, I'll be really forthcoming to my audience. I'm trying to get to a place where I can retire my parents. That's like a driving force of mine, is I want to get to a place financially where I can really help my family and set a foundation for myself. And I'm not there yet. I wasn't in Bitcoin in 2013. But I've been offered so much money to hawk like these pre-mines and these new tokens that come out or NFTs. And I turn it down because I wouldn't be able to look myself in the mirror or sleep well at night if I knew that I was going to lead someone to invest in something where they could potentially lose their life savings. And like, I don't know what the company's intentions are or who their VC backing is, or, how these coins all operate. Anyone can create a cryptocurrency, just like anyone could create a blog or a website. And so you inherently take on more risk by investing in the space. So I warn people, like, just be careful. I do believe that we're going to exist in a world where we have a DeFi industry and we have other tokens or other digital assets that people allocate their money to. And cool. Like, I wish people well with their investments. I'm a maxi in the sense that I don't do that because for me, it's like, I have to research all these companies, all these backers. How did this, function and work? And at the end of the day, to me, it's like stocks. It's like, why does it have to be so hard to just save money? And Bitcoin addresses that very problem within our financial system, that we don't have a savings technology in our money. We have to turn our houses into savings accounts. We have to invest in the stock market and try to play risk and hire portfolio managers or become day traders on the side. It's like, why is it so hard to just have money that retains its value? And so I focus on Bitcoin because that's what I see Bitcoin's potential as. And I feel like I've also been on the journey where I entered in and I bought a couple of shit coins, and then like I ended up losing on them because I didn't exit at the right time. And if I had put that money in Bitcoin, I would have been better off. And so you kind of learn, right? So I like when people are honest about those journeys of I shitcoin and then I Bitcoin, and but I'm not going to be toxic. If you want to put your money into whatever, I just say, hey, do your homework and be careful. Like, be careful, because this space is very unregulated. It has people that don't have great intentions, who are greedy, who are going to sell their bags and not tell you, and you'll be left holding the bag. And I just don't want to see that, especially for people who are good and hardworking. Because the last note I'll say about that, crypto is like this populist revolution, in my opinion. I think it's people who basically said, like, look, we've been left out of the legacy system and we want a shot. We want a shot to get like back at this and like get have some money, get rich or whatever. Like, so if you have a ton of people entering into the industry, buying up these tokens with that goal in mind, I think that it inherently leads to a potential bubble as well. And people who, allocate based on hearing that, oh, this meme token took off 1,000,000%. And then all of a sudden, like, it's down and these companies are kind of benefiting on that volatility in those trades. And you just have to really, really be careful. Because I'm in this space to change our money and to take care of my family someday. And I know that Bitcoin can help us get there. I don't know about any of these other things.
I don't either. I look at it this way. Most of the shit coins that have been sold are the promise to develop a thing. We're going to develop this distributed VPN technology or whatever it is. Well, go make the thing.
Yeah.
Right. Instead of putting out the token, it's like pre-selling a stock on a thing. And then most of it, the founders give themselves money. They have a pre-mine. They have some bag they create for themselves. As soon as they get it onto an exchange, they liquidate the vast majority of it. They make a ton of money. And now my incentive to work hard on the thing is gone.
Yep.
I've already made more money than the thing would have ever made me. So let me go do another pseudo thing. And then there's a lot of backdoor scamming. I'm sure you've heard with some of your guests how that works, where the reason you do the scam is because then you get in with all the other scammers and they're all pushing money around. It's a nasty space, and it doesn't mean none of them will ever be anything, but you're basically going to the over-the-counter big board stock exchange and throwing a dart at a wall. And I've did my share of it. I made money. I mean, very few did I get wrecked on. I made money. I got out at the right time. I even flipped Doge one time in the middle of a Telegram chat live, like threw up screenshots. Here, watch. They're going to pump it. Fine, I can do this. I took like $1,000 in affiliate income and threw it onto an exchange, flipped it 3 times in 2 days and put it into Bitcoin and left. You could play that game, but it's like playing with a snake. And what happens is people get into a market, like everybody gets in when the market's great, and then they buy some shit coins and then everything goes up and they think they're a genius.
Yeah.
Right? What's that called? The curve. Somebody's going to say it in the chat here. Dunning-Kruger. Right? Like your confidence is here, but your knowledge is here on the graph. Like you have no idea what's going on. And then reality sets in and your confidence plummets. And then you either can't continue to gain experience or you don't. And if you do, then your competence goes up. And I think there's a lot of that that's happened. And I have slowly been drug against my will because it didn't make sense to me that there would be one, like that would really be the one. But when I look at it that way, Bitcoin is its own value. It doesn't need the thing or the marketing or the you're back to that absolute scarcity only once.
Yeah. Now, I'm gonna make a comparison that some people like disagree with, but it's a good way for me to visualize and conceptualize kind of what you're talking about, especially with the difference between Bitcoin and crypto. I see Bitcoin as the emergence of the internet in the 90s, where most people don't have the foresight to understand how this would transform how business is conducted, how we communicate with each other, how information spreads. Like we just don't have that concept because we never had anything like it. And you're basically like if the internet was emerging and there was like tokens associated with the internet and its growth and its value as a network, and you're able to purchase like some of those, plots of digital real estate or tokens, versus everything else is like websites, like Google, you're betting on Google, MySpace, pets.com, Facebook, whatever. Yeah, some companies and some websites, they will take off and there will be network effect and they will have their own purposes and use cases that I'm sure other people will define, and we'll have some sort of metaverse that I don't even want to think about because I like living in the real world. But like at the most foundational base layer of what money is, I believe will be Bitcoin. Bitcoin will be the internet of money. And like for me, thinking about that, I'd rather put my money and my bet on the internet rather than a website.
Yeah. Yeah. So what, to me, a lot of these alternative coins were built on the idea that Bitcoin couldn't do this thing or that thing or the other thing. And now we have Lightning, and now we have Liquid, and now we have mini mints, and all these types of things that are being developed with layered technology, which I think is a very good thing. I think people don't understand it, so they initially reject it as being, centralized instead of decentralized. But I look at the base layer that is Bitcoin as the underlying asset, the real value. And I want Bitcoin devs to be as conservative with it as possible. I don't want a lot of risk taken on it. It works really good the way it is. Let's not mess it up. But we need this innovation, this agility to try things, right? So if you try it on a second layer or a third layer solution and it flops, Bitcoin don't care. It's the honey badger. It doesn't give a shit at all. It doesn't matter. That thing failed. So what? And people say, well, Bitcoin, no, it didn't. It's like when Mt. Gox got hacked way back in the day. Bitcoin price went down, but we just began the Bitcoin obituaries where it's died like 800 times now and it rises again. Yeah. So if we have those layers, we can try a lot of things, and a lot of things are being tried. I'm looking at things like guys are doing fundraising, what's being done with value for value podcasting. God bless Adam Curry for what he's done with that and how that's sprung into all these different apps like Breeze and Fountain FM and what have you, and podcasters getting value from listeners and listeners getting back the value from podcasters. And it is like when altcoins started to come out and there was all these ideas being thrown around it. I think it's part of what sucked people in early. And so there's a ton of exciting technology. And I know you're talking to tons of people in the industry. Is there a particular technology or a particular application of a technology that's really exciting to you right now in Bitcoin?
I mean, I just think it's the growth of the Lightning Network and the scaling that it promotes and creates the opportunity for. I'm watching it closely because right now we're not at a level where a bunch of merchants can come on. It's just we don't have that scale where we have the ability and we have enough nodes for that to be possible. And so we need to create that. It needs to grow. There are some tremendous companies working on this in the space. I really applaud. One of my dream guests is Elizabeth Stark. I would love to talk to her because she's doing so much to promote the growth of the Lightning Network. And they will enable through Taro, stable coins on top of Bitcoin. I think stable coins are going to be really important in this whole ecosystem as this technology develops and emerges and more people adopt it. But Lightning is the thing that I think will allow more and more people to use Bitcoin as a medium of exchange and allow for more adoption in that sense. But we still have ways to go. Lightning Network does not have that many transactions on it yet. So we'll see what happens. We'll see in 5 years. I think that the growth rate will be exponential.
What I love about the layered solution, let's say Lightning isn't all it's cracked up to be. Somebody will build one that is, but right now it is it's my thing. It's my jam. It's like, that's where all of the stuff is. When I realized what Strike does, for instance, when I realized, for instance, I can take my phone and I can deposit $50 into Strike. I can hit a QR code and I can deposit onto my cold storage wallet from Strike without actually ever buying Bitcoin. That the transaction itself creates the conversion and deposits the Bitcoin into my cold storage. I'm like, oh, it's over for the legacy payment. Like, the payment systems are what's going to get slaughtered by this first. Because if I can cross-border move money to any jurisdiction, and I can move dollars, I don't even need stable coins to do it right now. I can move dollars because we're liquid everywhere, 24/7.
Yeah.
And I'm transacting in assets, and the legacy payment is transacting in liabilities. Like, good, like, you're going to get just a merchant experience and savings. I had an accountant that I was debating with, and he said, I use Swift. It ain't that bad, whatever. And I'm like, and he's legit. He's doing big transactions, international, every day. And I'm like, back when I was in corporate America, if I had an accountant that could save me millions of dollars a year and they didn't do it, I would fire them.
Yeah.
No ideology whatsoever. Just wait a minute. I could have gone from 3% of transaction to a half point on all, or at least even 25% of these multi-million-dollar transactions, and you didn't do it. You're so fired. And so to me, that's exciting.
Yeah, Jack Mallers does a really great job talking about this and building this space and the layer 2 solutions. And he's working with major companies and trying to educate the IMF. So I highly recommend a lot of like the work that he's put out and the interviews he's done about this. And just really the idea of revolutionizing a system that hasn't been updated in many, many decades, that, takes a slice away from everybody as sort of that third party mechanism that we currently have, where you introduce like people that are, taking a cut from the customer, from the merchant. And like, we don't need to have that. We can have something instant that's settled immediately and that's lightning speed, that's verified. And I would love to have technology update this very archaic system for sure.
It needs to be done. So we got a few things from the audience. I've had you an hour 15. I don't know if you had that much time blocked off. Can we lightning round this though before you go?
Yeah. Okay. Lightning round.
All right. So, Natalie, I'd love for you to share the central banking as a chemical agriculture analogy again. It's fantastic. I'm not sure what he's talking about. Was that you?
I don't
one of
know
your
what
guests?
that is. The central banking as chemical agriculture. I don't know what that is.
I could go somewhere, but I won't because this is your time. Let's see. So I think maybe he heard that from a guest of yours and maybe not even on your show. And that's why we're both going,
I'll have to think about it.
It sounds like Safedine to me, actually, is what that sounds like. Thoughts on El Salvador's progress with Bitcoin Beach?
Yeah, so I've had the chance to visit El Salvador twice this year, and Bitcoin Beach is it's super impressive to me how immersed Bitcoin is in that community and in that local economy, and people are spending and transacting in Bitcoin, and there's just like a very fervent business kind of environment and energy there. I spoke to a place called Hope House to women, young women. Many of them are moms, but they're trying to start side businesses, and Bitcoin's enabling them to do that. Because again, you can kind of work from anywhere, and all you need is an internet connection and your phone, and it enables you to start to accumulate or spend or transact value. The one thing I will say that I found in El Salvador that though is there still needs to be much more education, because the administration kind of came in and said, we're adopting Bitcoin, but people don't understand what it is, especially like older folks and people in certain communities that don't have as much access to maybe digital information. A lot of people are unbanked, and so they're naturally wary and hesitant. And there isn't how do I put this? There isn't like a pattern or a like behavior that is common in El Salvador of just saving. You kind of live paycheck to paycheck.
Sure.
Some people take out loans. Like I interviewed some people at local markets who, in order to purchase the goods that they sell, they have to take out loans. And sometimes they have, higher interest rate on those. There isn't this idea that like, oh, we have a savings account, the way that, Americans are so used to like a 60-40 portfolio or whatever, 401k, to teach someone how and why to save is its own sort of mission and challenge. So Bitcoiners, what I love about the Bitcoin community and Bitcoin Beach, they are encouraging people not only to just start, transacting in it and using it for their business, but also, hey, put some away that you don't touch, like save. Start to save, even if it's just like a few sats, like here, have this and don't touch this account. And it's going to be volatile in the short term, but like this is like your bank account for the future. And so I hope that that emerges more, this idea of accumulation, savings, capital accumulation. And I'm happy for El Salvador that a spotlight is put on the country. You know, they are seeing more tourism and more investment. And I'm curious to see what's going to happen with the Bitcoin bonds. But I was really impressed and encouraged and inspired by what I saw in El Salvador.
Yeah, I think that it's hard for Americans to get their heads around. I lived in Panama for 2 years in the 90s and Honduras for 6 months. And the idea that you're going to save money when you don't have money, like Bitcoin, I think encourages savings. I'm seeing millennials save more money than they've ever saved once they get into Bitcoin because they start thinking about the future. But that's because they can give up a couple lattes a week. Like that's not a thing in rural Honduras, I promise you, nor rural El Salvador. I've not yet been there. Non-Bitcoin question, Natalie. What's her favorite Polish meal? What's an example of this?
Okay, so I'm from Poland and I also lived in Italy. So my two favorite cuisines are Polish and Italian. My favorite Polish meal is something called kotlets schabowe, and it's essentially like Wiener Schnitzel. It's like a breaded, flattened pork, and it's sauteed. And oh my God, I love it, and I make it a lot.
So for me, I grew up in kind of like this region of Pennsylvania that is just all Slovakian. There's Polish, there's Ukrainian, there's Georgian. I mean, it's just a mix, and like everybody looks the same, but everybody knew who everybody was, right? And it was all cool. We were all messing with each other, but there's a huge food overlap. So I mean, part of Ukraine used to be part of Poland.
For sure.
Right. So for me, it was pierogies, and the best is when you take them, they're poached, and then they go into the pan and they get browned on both sides, and you put the butter and the onions on top of them. And I'm all carnivore now, and I can't talk about this anymore because it makes me hungry. What have you both found to be the most effective way, if any, to talk to people in your lives about Bitcoin that don't get it yet?
It's a challenge. It's for sure a challenge. I've been successful at orange pilling some people and not so successful at others. I just try to start slow and really put a focus on the problems in our system and how Bitcoin fixes them. And I don't encourage people to like, oh my God, you put it all, everything that you have into Bitcoin right now. I say, hey, what's it going to hurt if you put 1% into this? If it takes off, amazing. And if it doesn't, are you upset about 1%? You know, like it depends how wary people are. I think you just need to start slow. But the more that you introduce, hey, have you ever thought about like the reason that this problem exists is because of this? And like, oh, did you know that like with money printing, do you know this? Do you know this statistic? I try to introduce things like that because I think something clicks and resonates. But it's a challenge because everybody's different. Everybody's rabbit hole journey is different. I
try to seed plant. So I'll like say a little bit about it and go away. And then they'll hear about it in the news and like the FOMO kicks in and then they ask and they give you permission. Yeah. And then my target is always entrepreneurs because I'm always like, why don't you just accept it?
Yeah.
Why don't you just accept it? Like, because you lose nothing. If nobody buys it, it doesn't matter. And I'll help you. Because it's not that hard to start accepting Bitcoin, especially like content creators. Like just throw a QR code on your website. It's not the best security practice, but when you start getting Bitcoin, let me know and we'll fix it. Right. And then what I've been using lately is Lightning, because I'll just tell somebody like download wallet of Satoshi or something like that. Like, and I'll just send them $1.
That's cool.
Right. Just send them $1 and they watch that dollar like instantly there. And they're like, what do I do? They're like, watch it. And when it gets bigger, let me know and I'll help you get more of it.
Cool.
And like try to plant seeds and walk away because
plant seeds.
Forcing information on somebody not ready for it actually makes them less receptive.
I agree.
Right?
I agree.
What sources does she use for legitimate relative info on crypto reporting versus hype and shillers? I think that would be as a reporter on any information you want to gather. Where do you get relevant information? I know the answer, but
I triangulate, I quadrangulate. I go to multiple sources. You know, there are a lot of outlets now that report on crypto or digital assets from ones that are really within the space. And, you know, the CoinDesks, Cointelegraphs, Bitcoin Magazine I've contributed to, at large, like legislative updates are often covered by Bloomberg and by CNBC and all of that. And I really I try to read everything, but I will say that most of best information that I've gotten are people that are really thoughtful thinkers and strategists and economists in the space. So I follow the Lynn Aldens, the Preston Pishes, all the people that like they tweet most of their information or they do podcast interviews as opposed to like articles that I would read. And I try to get to the source as much as possible, which is what I try to do with my show, is bring people on and let them share the story.
And another shout out for Lynn. Guys, if you're not following Lynn, you need to follow Lynn. Lynn is one of the most brilliant minds in economics and finance, in my opinion. Yeah. If you could send one person to Orange Pill Joe Rogan, who would it be?
Me.
I was going to give the same answer. Me.
I would do it. I would love to go on Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan, hit me up.
Yeah, Joe, let's go. You bring us both on. We'll orange pill them together, of course. Yeah. Now, I guess if you had to say somebody other than me, like to pin us down, I don't know. Sailor or Maulers.
Yeah,
I think would be who I would ask to do that. Please ask, are Bitcoin IRAs safe for the next thing to implode? I don't think they're going to implode. My problem with Bitcoin IRAs, I don't think the law's clear yet.
Yeah, there definitely needs to be more clarity. I think that you need to do your own research on companies. And so I have a Bitcoin IRA that I'm very happy with. And I haven't seen the kind of concerns that we see in the greater crypto contagion with some of these platforms that were really didn't have the proper reserves and all of that. So I urge people caution, like you really have to do your own homework, because I can't give financial advice on that.
And I have one too, and they say you can't, like people are starting to say you can't self-custody, but I have self-custody. I have a multi-sig, and so it's a 2 of 3 multi-sig, and the company holds 1, and I hold 2. I could move it right out of there. Now I've got tax consequences if I do that. They're going to report that, but I have self-custody, and they don't have access because they only have 1 of the keys. So I don't know where this is coming from. I'm not sure if maybe a new thing came out of bull. I
have to hop off. I'm sorry.
All right, Natalie. Well, hey, thanks for being with us today. I really appreciate it. Guys and gals, she stayed longer than we had planned. So thank you, Natalie.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Thank you, guys.
No worries.
Bye.